back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing two different tutorials and a review using this new palette from Urban Decay. This is called the Naked Reloaded palette. This just recently launched on the Urban Decay website, and thank goodness for ShopRunner because I got it in 2 days. I just got it like an hour ago, and so I'm really excited to dive in and play around with it. I wanted to do two different looks with this palette because I feel like I want to use as many shades as I possibly can just to give you guys the best review I possibly can and give you guys my full honest opinion on it. So this palette retails for $44. It's a mixture from silky mattes and metallics to iridescent micro shimmers. These 12 versatile shadows contain our mind-blowing formula with its velvety texture, rich color, and extreme blendability. And I will say right off the bat, the packaging is completely different than any other palette that I've had from Urban Decay. So typically, you know, like all of the other palettes kind of had that like tin type feeling, you know what I mean? Like the tin type material. This is like pillow soft. This feels like a pillow, which in my mind and in my opinion is genius on Urban Decay's part. I love the feeling of this. I love the way it looks. It looks so luxurious, and I love this bright gold. Like the packaging on this, you guys, is probably, in my opinion, this is the best that Urban Decay has ever done. And I will be completely honest, this is probably one of my favorite packaging so far from any palette that I have. I have a lot of palettes. I have a lot of favorite palettes. But this packaging in particular is so unique. It has that pillow type feel to it. It's very soft, like it's a naked palette. So you're on a pillow and you might be sleeping naked. It's kind of like that type of a feeling. Feels very luxurious, you guys. I'm obsessed with the packaging. Now, when this palette launched, I wasn't like super over the moon about it. I wasn't like super excited to try it, only because I feel like I have all of these shades in my collection. Like I do. I have all of these shades in all of my palettes. So I wasn't like over the moon about it, but I was definitely gonna buy it to review it for you guys. I don't know, it's different than what I thought it was gonna be. When I opened it up, I liked it so much more than I did when I seen it online, I'm gonna be honest. Everybody's been talking about this palette being so similar to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette. So at the end of the video, I will go ahead and swatch some of these shades and compare it to some of the shades in the Sultry palette. For those of you guys out there that have the Sultry palette, then you can decide if this is worth getting, if it's very similar. I'm gonna do two different looks. This is look one, and I'm gonna go ahead and wash all my makeup off and come back down and start again. So let's head straight into the tutorial, and then later on after both tutorials, I will come back and I will swatch it, we'll compare it to the Sultry palette, and then I will give you guys my full final thoughts on the palette and if I feel like it's worth the $44. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Okay, fresh off the UPS truck, I finally have this palette here in my hands. I'm super excited about it, and I love the feeling of this. This feels like a pillow. It is material, so it's like a really silky, gorgeous material. I am obsessed with the feeling of this palette. You guys, this is beautiful. This is prettier than I thought it was gonna be. Those shades are stunning. I already love the way it looks. Now, I really hope that the shadows perform. I'm gonna take a big kind of fluffy brush and I'm gonna go into the first shade, which is called Bribe, and I love how this folds back. So they have this like, this is very easy to fold back. I love that. So I'm gonna go into this shade Bribe, which is the first shade in the palette. I am going to sweep this all over my eyelids. Now I did prime my eyes with the P. Louise eyeshadow base just to kind of get them set and ready for shadow. First things first, I'm gonna go into the shade Boundaries, and I'm going to kind of place this in my crease a little bit and kind of build up some dimension. So far, that shade is very creamy. I really hope that these shadows are as creamy as the one I just put on, because if it is, and they are, this might be my new favorite naked palette from Urban Decay. All right, now I'm gonna go into the shade Retro, and I'm gonna pop Retro right over top and just bring a little bit of that peachiness to my eyelid. Oh, again, creamy, you guys. Oh my gosh. I wasn't really that excited about this palette. And I am actually really excited. Now, let me just say this. Do I feel like these shades are revolutionary? No. I mean, we all have these palettes with these shades in here, but I just love the layout and having them all in one. And let me just tell you, that blended so fast and so good. They are buttery and creamy, and I love the way that that just applied. All right, now I'm just gonna take this bigger brush. By the way, I'm using the Pro Eye Set from Sonia G. There's several different things I could do here. I could just put a shimmer on the lid and call it a day, because that would just be very easy, very beautiful on the eye. I could deepen up the outer corner and still give me that peachiness. There's really a lot of options within the palette, more than I thought there was gonna be. So I'm going to take this brush right here, which is called the Builder Pro, and I'm going to go into the shade Bucked. I'm going to bring this right here on the outer corner and kind of work that in. And then I'm going to go into Endgame, which is pretty dark. So I'm going to see how this will apply. I'm going to take the exact blend brush from Sigma. This is the E32, and I'm going to go back into Bucked, and I'm going to kind of pop this over top and then just really try to blend those. And then I'm going to go into Retro. I'm giving these some dimension, but I'm popping that peach back over top of it, you know? Okay, I am going to work on my lower lash line for a minute. I'm going to take this brush from Sigma. This is the Shader Crease brush. This is the E47. And I'm going to go into Retro. And then I'm going to go into Bucked. I'm going to go back in with Crease Pro, and I'm going to go into Retro one more time and kind of just really bring that shade to life here in my crease, just to give me that really beautiful peachy moment. I'm going to go into Reputation, and I'm going to take my felt tip applicator, and I'm just going to dampen it with my makeup wipe here. I'm going to go into that shade Reputation, and I'm going to pop this right here on the lid. I'm going to go on the other side of the felt tip applicator, and I'm going to go into the shade Burn, which is right next to it. And I'm going to pop that right here on the outer corner just to give me that shimmering depth. It's a shimmer shade, but it's a little bit darker. I'm going to take this brush, which is the exact blend brush from Sigma, and I'm going to go into the shade Bucked. And I'm going to bring this back here on the lower lash line. And then I'm going to go into Retro. Go back to the Shader Crease brush, the E47. And I'm going to go into the shade Endgame, that real dark brown. And I'm just going to kind of carve out this part right here, just to give it a little bit of a separated look between those two, between the crease and the lid. Sometimes if I want it to pop a little bit, that's what I'll do, is I'll just kind of put a dark shade in there, and then I'll just really blend it out. So now I'm going to go into that shader brush. Is that the shader brush? No, the exact blend brush. I can't get these straight. And just kind of blend that into the crease and just kind of diffuse the line. I'm going to go back into the crease brush, and I'm going to go into that shade Endgame, and I'm just going to gently blend that into my crease. Very so gently. Okay, wipe that off. Then I'm going to go back into Retro. The thing that I will also say about this palette, I feel like this palette is definitely all skin tone friendly, which is really, really nice. I'm going to take this little smudger brush. This is the E21 from Sigma, and I'm going to go into the Endgame, And I'm gonna pop this right close to my lash line here on the outer part of my eye. So for the inner corner, I'm gonna take this brush from the Jaclyn Hill Morphe collection. This is the JH39. I'm gonna go into the shade Angel Fire, which looks really freaking pretty. Oh, she looks pretty. And I am going to coat the brush with that. I'm gonna wet it down. I think I might pop some here on my brow bone. Why not? I'm just barely doing that. This is the Highliner Gel Eyeliner from Marc Jacobs. This is in the shade Brown. It's like, I think it's called Earthquake. And I'm gonna go ahead and tightline on my upper waterline and kind of get that nice and covered, just so that when I put lashes on, you don't see that skin, you know? Okay, so this is the final look. I just went ahead and threw on some House of Lashes in this style, Iconic Lights. I almost just said shade, but you know. For my lip, I just threw on something very easy and pretty to kind of go with this whole look. I'm obsessed with, you guys, by the way. I am wearing the Charlotte Tilbury in Iconic Nude. I also put on the Smashbox Gloss Angeles gloss in the shade 72 and Honey, which has been one of my favorite combos lately. I just love that combination. First things first, I love this eyeshadow look, and it's so pretty, you guys. I love this. It was so easy to create. What I really like about this so far is just the blendability within the shades. Like, they blend so amazingly. So I'm gonna go ahead and wash this off and come back fresh and ready to go for the second look. And I'm excited about it because I'm excited to go back in and just be even more creative. I will be back fresh faced and ready for round 2. So I will see you guys then. Okay, round 2, I just took off my eye makeup, so I don't really have concealer on because I really wiped, you know, all of that off because I had like mascara and stuff on. So I didn't want to take off all of my makeup because who wants to do their brows 2 times in one day? Not me. Went back in with my P. Louise base, but I've left the concealer off just so that if it makes a mess, I'm good, you know? I don't need to worry about messing up my concealer. I'm gonna go ahead and grab my Sonia G Pro crease brush. So I put the P. Louise base back on, and then I went over it with the shade Bribe, just to kind of like brighten things up a little bit. So I'm gonna go into the shade Boundaries, and I'm gonna use that to kind of build up this crease just a little bit. So I have to say, Boundaries is a really nice transition shade. Now, I have this similar shade in my KKW Beauty Classic palette, and it's one of my favorite shades just to kind of pop right there in the crease, and it's a nice dimension shade, so I really like that shade. I'm gonna go into Bucked now and just kind of go over top and just really bring some of that in. Now, after I got done filming the first part, you know, I was really excited about this palette because I really do. I love the packaging, and I really loved how easy it was to create the first look. But after really diving in and kind of looking at it closer, I have found some things that I don't like about the palette, and I'm definitely going to get into that in my final thoughts. Now I'm going to go into the shade Endgame, and I'm going to bring this towards the bottom part of my crease and just really work that in. That one is a brown, but it has a gray tone to it, so it's definitely a cool tone brown. So I'm gonna wipe the brush off, and I'm gonna go back into Bucked, and I'm just gonna kind of put Bucked back over top just to bring it back to life. And I'm gonna do the same thing with Boundaries, because I don't want to get rid of that taupey shade. I just want to deepen it. And so I always like going back in with my transition shade just to kind of bring it back to life. Blendability of Endgame is amazing. It is a shade that likes to blend, and I don't have any issues with that shade blending whatsoever. So Endgame is the darker shade in the palette, that you're going to use to kind of build your depth, but it really, really builds and it blends really good. You see how, like, and that didn't take me hardly any blending. Like, that just really blended out. Now I'm going to go in with this brush. This is the Builder Pro, and I'm going to go in with Bucked. And I'm gonna kind of like bring this here on the outer corner. I'm gonna kind of push it here towards the middle, but I'm really building this up. Now I'm going into Boundaries, and I'm just gonna really build this up. But I really, really, really like Endgame. It's a nice blendable shade. It really, really likes to blend out. For my lid, I really, really want to use this gold shade because when I put my finger in it, it's so pretty, you guys. It reminds me of Amrezy. So this is Amrezy, and this is the Barely Baked. So it kind of has that same texture to it. Obviously, it's a little bit darker than Amrezy, but it's very, very beautiful, you guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my felt tip applicator, and I'm gonna dampen it. I cleaned it from the last time I used it. And I'm gonna go into Barely Baked, and I'm gonna put this all over. Oh my gosh, that shade is so freaking pretty. You guys, this shade is stunning. That gold shade is absolutely beautiful. It is probably one of the prettier gold shades. I freaking love that shade. I'm gonna take this brush from Sigma. This is the Shader Crease Brush. And I'm gonna go into Bucked. And I'm gonna pop that right there to kind of just soften up that edge a little bit because it's not really a cut crease. So I'm kind of softening that up a little bit. Then I'm gonna go back into the Builder Pro, and I'm gonna go into Bucked. And kind of blend that in. And then I'm gonna go into Distilled. And that is a very pretty, like, coppery shade. It's like a really pretty cool tone coppery shade. And I think I might apply that with my finger, but I'm gonna kind of like lightly like dust that into it and kind of like blend that in to that beautiful champagne shade. Now, I did get a little bit of fallout with that, so you know, I do think that you do get fallout with these shades. So I recommend, you know, maybe not applying your concealer just right away, you know. If you want to do your face makeup, you totally can. Just do your concealer after, or you can do your eye look first and then do your makeup. Went ahead and put my concealer on, and now I'm going to go ahead and put the eyeshadows on the lower lash line. I'm going to take this brush. This is the Exact Blend brush from Sigma. I'm going to go into Boundaries first. I'm going to blend Boundaries right up under here and just kind of blow that out just a little bit. Then I'm going to go into Bucked. And I like Boundaries because Boundaries is really warm, and then Bucked is a little bit on the cooler side. So putting them together is a pretty combination. Then I'm going to take, this is the E21 smudge brush from Sigma, and I'm going to go into the shade Endgame. And I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did on the last tutorial, just keeping it real close to the lash line. And then I'm going to go into Boundaries and Bucked and kind of dipped between them two. And then I'm going to really like blend. Exact same thing. I'm going to take a brown eyeliner. This one is the Marc Jacobs one. And I am going to tightline the upper waterline. For the inner corner, I think I'm going to bring Barely Baked in there. I don't know. I just want a little bit of it. So I'm just going to kind of wet the brush with my damp makeup wipe that I have sitting here. And I'm going to go into that Barely Baked. And I'm just going to gently, lightly kind of bring that into the inner corner, but not like, you know, like a full inner corner highlight. I might go into my Amrezy too and just kind of lighten it up, like have this as the base, but then put Amrezy over top of it. So now I'm going to go into the Amrezy. This is the ABH. This is what I use for my mirror. And just really pop that. Oh, yes. See how pretty that is? Okay, so I am back with the final look done. I have my lashes on, And as far as my lippy, I went ahead and put the lip liner on from KKW Beauty, the Nude #2. And then I also popped More Creamer Please, this right on the lip. Like, I love this just to kind of like, it has that perfect like beige tone to it. And then I put a tiny bit of Juicy from, oh, if I can grab it. Tiny bit of Juicy from KKW Beauty, which is my favorite. This is my favorite gloss of all time. I love Juicy. Juicy's my favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the swatches of the palette, and then I will give you guys my full final thoughts on the palette. So this is the shade Blur. This is Boundaries. This is Bucked, Distilled, Dreamweaver, Endgame, Burn, Reputation, Retro, Angel Fire, Barely Baked, and Bribe. So that's all the shades in the palette swatched. And I've pretty much used every shade in the palette but one, which I'm going to get into that shade in a second. It's not my favorite shade. So let's get into my final thoughts about this palette. I have a lot to say. I'm going to try to keep my thoughts concise and to the point, but let me get started. Let me start with what I like about the palette. What I like about the palette is I love the range of colors. I like how they start light and then they go dark and then they go light again. I think that's very unique. I like having the dark shades here in the palette in the middle and then like the lighter shades on the outside. I do love that. I like the way that they put the shades together, and this is kind of that perfect neutral palette. It is exactly what it's described as. It's a creamy neutral palette that you can create any neutral look that you want with it. It's, you know, they blend really good. They're creamy. They're a little bit different than like ABH. So like ABH is powdery, but very pigmented. These are creamy, but you gotta build the pigment. They're not as pigmented as an ABH palette, but you still get really, really good payoff. And once you build it to the dimension that you want, it doesn't take that much to blend them out. And because they're creamy, they blend very easily. So that's the thing that I like about this Endgame shade. It's the darkest shade in the palette. It blends so beautifully. The two on the outsides, so you have Blur and Boundaries, and then you have Barely Baked and Bribe. So these are bigger than the rest of the shades in the palette. And I know it's because they think that we use these shades more, but I don't use these lighter shades that often. Like, I only use them to probably go over like my shadow primer or my concealer or whatever to kind of set it. But I kind of wish that they would have used, I kind of wish that Retro was a part of this. Now I am glad that they used Barely Baked as one of the bigger shades because I really love that shade on my lid. I think it's such a beautiful shade. Because Retro is the only like peachy tone in the palette, I kind of wish that that shade was one of the bigger shades over here. But because they started light and then kind of moved down to the dark and then went back light again, that's kind of the way that they chose to do it. Kind of wish that Bucked and Boundaries were the big ones because I think over here on the end, I don't feel like this shade is going to be a shade that I personally use all the time as a transition. However, if you have a lighter skin tone than I do, then that is going to be a perfect shade to build up any type of dimension within the crease. Now, let me just say this. The shade that I cannot stand in this palette is this one right here, which is called Dreamweaver. So Dreamweaver and Distilled are like sisters. And also Burn and Reputation are like sisters. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So if you swatch Distilled, so here we got Distilled right here. Okay, if you put Distilled right there and then you put Dreamweaver right next to it. Well, Dreamweaver is extremely chunky inside the pan. It's super messy and it's not pigmented. I don't even understand why that shade is in the palette because although it's intended to be like a darker, more gunmetal version of Distilled, it takes so much to build up the pigmentation within that shade, and I feel like they missed the mark when they created that shade. So Dreamweaver could have been so much more pigmented, but it's a chunky mess and it's really messy to swatch. It's messy to put on, and I just don't like that shade. I don't feel like that shade was necessary in my opinion, because Distilled is so pretty on its own. It's kind of a bronzy shade, and don't get me wrong, I think Dream Waver would have been really, really pretty had it been the shade that it looks like in the pan, but it's weak. Like, it is a weak shade. Like, it's super weak. I mean, as you can see, I'm trying to like swatch it on my hand. It's just a weak shade. So I feel like they missed the mark with Dream Waver, and it's kind of a waste of space inside the palette. Now, if you go into Burn and Reputation, these two are very similar, but they're also different because Burn is just the deeper version of Reputation, and I kind of feel like Distilled is supposed to be a deeper version of Dream Waver, but the problem is Dream Waver was intended to be kind of that gunmetal look, and it's just not pigmented. As you can see, this one right here is Dream Waver, and it's just much messier. I don't know if it's showing up, but it's just messier than all of these other shades that you have here in the palette, and it just becomes, I don't know, I'm just not a super huge fan of that shade right there. I'm just not. Do I feel like this palette is unique? No. I mean, you probably have other palettes in your collection that are so similar to these shades. It's like, it's a very normal, everyday palette that we all have. But do I love the palette? Yes. Do I like the palette? Do I feel like the palette is worth $44? Yeah. I actually like this one more than some of the other Naked palettes that I have in my collection. I think they did a great job with this. However, with all that said, I don't feel like this is a palette that you need to run out and grab if you have these shades in your collection, because I just kind of feel like, even though I love it, I really do like this palette. I really do. It's a palette that I know will never disappoint me, as far as like, you can create any kind of neutral looks that you want with it. Now let's get into kind of comparing it to some of the shades in the Sultry palette. Okay, let's go into Retro, which is like that peachy corally shade. It's a really pretty peachy shade. And then let's go into Bloom in the Sultry palette. So this one is the Retro shade in the Urban Decay palette. This is the Bloom shade in the Sultry palette. So the Bloom shade from the Sultry palette is much more pigmented. So just so that you guys can see what those shades look like. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab Teak, this one right here, and let's swatch it next to Distilled from the Reloaded palette. Okay, now those are kind of similar as well. So this one is the Teak shade from the Sultry palette, and this is Distilled from the Reloaded palette. So those are very similar. I would say that the one from the Urban Decay palette is a little bit more on like the greenish side. This one's a little bit more bronzy. There's some definite similarities that I'm seeing so far. So let's go into Rose Quartz in the Sultry palette, which is one of my favorite rose golds ever. I don't know that I have a rose gold shade quite like this one. This one right here, this is the Rose Quartz in the Sultry palette. And then let's go into Reputation in the Reloaded palette. So this one is from the Sultry palette, and this one is the Reloaded. So they're similar. They're definitely similar, but this one is much more pigmented. I mean, you can see that Rose Quartz is just very, very blinding and just so beautiful. I love the dimension within that shade. It's so pretty. It's one of my favorites. All right, let's go into Cinder. Cinder might be similar to Burn in the Reloaded palette. Let's see what that, oh no. Okay, so this is the Burn shade in the Reloaded palette, and this is Cinder in the ABH palette. So as you can see, those are quite different. They have the same type of shade, but they're still different. Let's go into Ember in the Sultry palette, and then let's go into Distilled in the Reloaded palette. This one is Ember, and this one is Distilled. So you guys, there are a lot of similarities between these palettes. They're not exact, but they're extremely similar. So there's something to be said. If you already have the Sultry palette, you probably are not going to need the Reloaded palette because they're very, very similar. Okay, let's go into Steampunk, which Steampunk is kind of like this really pretty gold shade in the Sultry palette. Let's put that next to Barely Baked. This is Barely Baked, and this is Steampunked. So Steampunked is definitely darker than Barely Baked. I really love this shade. This is the one that I have on my lid right now, but similar but not. There are a lot of similarities in these two palettes, like more than I thought there was gonna be. Of course, when you put them side by side, they look really, really similar, but when you swatch them, they even look more similar. This is Dystopian from the Sultry palette, and this is Endgame from the Reloaded palette. So those two are almost identical. I mean, those are very, very similar. Seriously, very similar. If you really love the Sultry palette and it's like one of your top favorites, I kind of feel like you'll really like the Reloaded, because even though they're very similar, they're also very different at the same time. And you almost get things from the Reloaded palette that you don't get from the Sultry palette, and you know, vice versa. But there's always that other side that it's like, okay, I already have the Sultry palette. I really don't need the Reloaded palette. You know, that's just going to be up to you depending on what you need in your collection. And if you're a cool tone type of person, then if you feel like you have enough cool tone shades, then I don't think that you need the Reloaded palette. But again, my review is just to kind of give you my opinion on the blendability, the texture of these, how I feel about it. If you're interested in buying it, I don't think that you'll be disappointed. My opinion is coming from a reviewing perspective. Let's just say I don't have my channel and I don't review on here and I don't review products. If I already had the Sultry palette, I don't know that I would buy the Reloaded palette, only because I don't feel like I would need it. But now that I have it, I'm like, yeah, I really actually like this palette. Because on a scale from 1 to 10, I would give this palette like an 8. I really love the palette. I feel like I would change a few things in here, and I really do not like that Dreamweaver shade. Urban Decay is kind of hit and miss with me anyway. Like sometimes I like their palettes, and other times I'm like, oh, that palette is garbage. So it all depends on... It all depends on the palette. It really does, because it's hit and miss for me. Sometimes I really, really love the palettes, and sometimes I don't. And I think I will definitely be using it more and more. And I'm starting to really love the whole cool tone moment. So I will definitely be pulling this palette, because I really love that retro shade too. I love the peachy moments in here. So that's it for my tutorial and my review. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you guys again for all the love that you guys show me and my channel. It truly means the world to me. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day filled with love and joy. I will see you guys right back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. for Foundation Friday. And I love you guys so much. Bye. And then I also put on the, what is this called? Go ahead and put the, what am I talking about?